Every night I locked the door. Every night I checked the windows. But no lock, no curtain could keep him out, not when he already knew my name. My name is KK. And I used to think safety was a given, something you took for granted, like air or sleep. That was before the man in the gray shirt walked into Church's Chicken, before his eyes locked onto me, before I realized how fragile the walls of my world really were. It started with a smile, the kind that lingers too long, the kind that makes your stomach twist. And once he smiled, I was never alone again. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the Church's chicken counter. It was a Tuesday, slow as molasses, the kind of night where you count ceiling tiles to stay awake. I was refilling the sweet tea dispenser, the sticky syrup clinging to my fingers, when the door chime cut through the quiet. My coworker Dev was in the back, probably sneaking fries, so I wiped my hands on my apron and turned to face the customer. He was unremarkable, at first medium height, maybe mid-30s, in a plain gray t-shirt and faded jeans. But his eyes, they didn't flicker to the menu board like most customers. They fixed on me sharp and unblinking, like he was memorizing every inch of my face. I forced a smile, the kind you plaster on for minimum wage, and stepped to the register. Welcome to Church's. What can I get started for you? My voice was steady, practiced. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on the counter, closer than anyone should stand. His gaze dropped to my name tag, pinned just above my heart. KK, he said, drawing out the letters like he was tasting them. That's pretty, KK. My skin prickled. I shifted my weight, glancing at the empty dining area. Thanks. 3-piece, dark, mashed potatoes and gravy. His voice was smooth, almost too smooth, like he'd rehearsed it. As I punched in the order, he kept watching his lips curling into a small, private smile. You smell nice, like vanilla. I froze, fingers hovering over the register. I did use vanilla body wash, cheap stuff from the drugstore. But how did he know? The counter was wide, the air heavy with fried chicken and grease. There was no way he could smell me. I mumbled a thanks, avoiding his eyes, and gave him the total. He paid in exact change, counting each coin into my palm, his fingers brushing mine. They were damp, clammy, like he'd been holding something too long. Number 42, I said, shoving the receipt at him. We'll call you when it's ready. He didn't move to the pickup counter right away. He just stood there, staring that smile, never fading. When Dev finally called his number, he took the bag, gave me one last look, and said, See you soon, KK. The door chimed as he left, and I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Dev poked his head out from the kitchen. You good dude was weird. Yeah, I lied, wiping the counter harder than necessary. Just another creep. But he wasn't just another creep. I didn't know it then, but that man David, as I'd later learn, had already begun to unravel my life thread by thread. My rental house was a 15-minute drive from Church's, a squat 2-bedroom in an old subdivision where the lawns were patchy and the neighbors' TVs bled through the walls. It was cheap, drafty, and mine my first taste of independence after moving out of my parents' place. The bathroom had a frosted glass window facing the side yard, its edges warped with age. You couldn't see details through it, just vague shapes. Dog walkers, kids on bikes. The occasional shadow. That night, I got home around 10, my feet aching from standing all shift. I kicked off my sneakers, the faint smell of fried chicken clinging to my uniform, and headed for the shower. It was my ritual hot water, vanilla body wash, a half hour to wash away the day. As the steam rose, I noticed a shadow through the frosted glass. It moved slowly, pausing near the window, then drifted away. Probably the barn's beagles, I thought. They were always sniffing around the yard. I turned up the radio, letting the music drown out my unease. But the unease didn't leave. It settled in my chest, heavy and cold, like a stone I couldn't dislodge. I double-checked the locks before bed, something I hadn't done in weeks. The house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies every creak, every rustle. I told myself I was being paranoid. Just a long day, just a weird customer. Nothing more. Thursday came, and so did he. Same time, same order. 3-piece, dark, mashed potatoes, and gravy. I was at the register again. Dev flipping chicken in the back. The door chimed, and there he was, gray shirt jeans, that same smile. My stomach dropped. Hi, KK, he said, his voice almost playful. You look tired. I was tired. I'd stayed up late, cramming for an accounting exam, my eyes burning from too much coffee and too little sleep. Long day, I said, keeping my tone flat. What can I get you? Same as last time. He leaned in closer than before, his elbows on the counter. You should get more sleep. What time did you go to bed last night? Midnight. Later, my fingers faltered on the register. I'd gone to bed just after midnight, but there was no way he could know that. It was a guess, I told myself. A lucky guess. Lots of people stay up late, I said, forcing a smile. Your total's $8.47. He paid his damp fingers, brushing mine again. Vanilla again, he said, his eyes locked on mine. Do you use that Every night, KK. Around 10:30, the air felt thick, like I was breathing through a straw. I fumbled his change, dropping a quarter. He didn't pick it up. He just watched me, his smile widening, like he was feeding off my discomfort. When Dev called his order, he lingered by the door, his parting words slicing through the quiet. "See you later, KK." I told Dev about him during cleanup, my hands shaking as I scrubbed the counter. "He's creepy, Dev. He knows stuff he shouldn't." "Tell Richie," Dev said, tossing a rag into the sink. "Maybe we can ban him." I did tell Richie, but he just shrugged. "He complimented your body wash, KK. That's not a crime. Let me know if he does something worse." Something worse. The words echoed in my head as I drove home, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I pulled the bathroom blinds down, even though the frosted glass was opaque. I checked the locks twice, 3 times, my fingers trembling as I turned the deadbolt. The bathroom door didn't lock. Old house, old mechanisms, but it latched shut. I made sure of it, moving the hair dryer cord that always got caught in the frame. The click of the latch was clear final. I started the shower, the hot water stinging my skin. I tried to focus on the routine shampoo, conditioner, shave my legs, but my eyes kept darting to the frosted window. No shadows this time, just the hum of the water and the faint crackle of the radio. I was fine. I had to be fine. When I pulled back the curtain to grab my towel, the bathroom door was wide open. Not ajar, not cracked, wide open, revealing the dark hallway beyond. My heart stopped, a cold jolt racing through me. I wrapped the towel around myself, listening, waiting. Old houses settle, I told myself. Latches slip. It happens, but the silence was wrong. Too heavy, too alive. I crept to the bedroom, still dripping my bare feet, leaving wet prints on the hardwood. I reached for my dresser, desperate to get dressed to feel normal again. That's when I heard it, a giggle, soft and muffled, coming from the closet. My body froze, every nerve screaming. The closet door was closed, but the sound was unmistakable. A low, stifled laugh, like someone was trying to stay quiet. Someone was in my room, in my home. My instincts kicked in, overriding the urge to scream. I backed toward the door, slow and casual, like I hadn't heard a thing. My hand closed around my phone on the nightstand, and I made it to the hallway. Then I ran. Barefoot, in just a towel, I burst through the front door, the cold night air biting my skin. Mrs. Chittles was on her porch next door, watering her plants despite the late hour. I must have looked insane, but she didn't hesitate. Someone's in my house. I gasped, and she pulled me inside, locking her door. She called 911, her voice calm but firm. The police arrived fast. 2 units surrounding my house. I watched from Mrs. Chittles' window, my heart pounding as they went in. 5 minutes later, he came running out to the back door, gray shirt jeans scrambling over the fence. The cops tackled him before he made it to the Barnes' yard. The officer who took my statement was kind but direct. They'd found wet footprints throughout the house, bathroom, bedroom, kitchen. The shower walls were streaked with water at face height, like someone had pressed their body against them. His shirt was soaked, his mouth wet. I didn't want to hear the rest, but she told me anyway. He'd been licking the walls, tasting where I'd been. His name was David. They found notebooks in his car, pages filled with my schedule, my outfits, snippets of conversations I'd had with Dev or customers. There were sketches of me, my yard, my windows. He'd been watching me for weeks, maybe months, before he ever stepped into churches. He knew about the spare key under the fake rock by the door, something I'd mentioned once to a coworker. He'd overheard it somehow. David had a record peeping, breaking and entering, but nothing violent. Yet. "You're lucky," the prosecutor said. "These types escalate." The giggle in the closet, the way he'd waited for me to undress. He was feeding on my fear, savoring it. If I'd stayed, if I'd gone to bed, I couldn't let myself think about it. I broke my lease and moved in with my cousin across town. I quit churches, got a job in an office with keycard access, changed my gym, my grocery store, my everything. David got 18 months, but he'd likely serve 6. A restraining order was an option. But what good was paper against someone like him? I still hear that giggle sometimes, in the quiet of my new apartment. I see his smile, his damp fingers, his eyes that saw too much. I think about how normal he looked, just another guy ordering chicken, and how he chose me. I haven't felt safe since not in my home, not in my skin. And somewhere out there, David knows my name. The silence of St. Agatha's wrapped around me like a shroud, heavy and cold. The kind of quiet that makes you question if you're truly alone. I was 20, a broke college junior, drowning in textbook costs and rent I couldn't afford. My roommate Garrett had mentioned his church needed a night custodian, 20 hours a week, $10 an hour, just emptying trash and mopping floors. It sounded like a lifeline, so I took it. St. Agatha's wasn't just any church. It was a relic, built when the town had money to burn all stone walls, stained glass that glowed like dying embers, and carved oak pews that creaked under their own weight. The air inside smelled of wax and old hymnals, and every step echoed like a confession. Father Brennan interviewed me in his office, a cramped room with bookshelves sagging under dusty tomes. He was a wiry man, glasses perched on a nose too sharp for his face, his voice soft but deliberate. He asked about my class schedule, if I was okay working alone at night. When I mentioned I was a history major, his eyes lit up. We ended up talking about medieval monasticism for 20 minutes before he remembered he was supposed to be hiring me. I started that Monday, and that's when I met Diane. Diane was the kind of woman who owned every room she walked into, not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty. Short, graying hair pulled into a tight ponytail, hands rough from years of bleach and polish. She moved through St. Agatha's like it was her home. She trained me that first night, showing me where the supplies were kept, which doors stuck, how to coax the ancient boiler in the basement to life. The church had an underground level storage rooms, a furnace, and a crypt, of all things, from when they buried people on the property. The crypt door was heavy oak, banded with iron, tucked in an alcove near the boiler. It's been locked since the 60s. Diane said, her voice flat. Nobody's buried down there anymore, but the door works loose sometimes. Building settles. Check it when you lock up. She mentioned the last night custodian Rory, a young guy who'd worked there for 8 months before he started flaking, showing up late, calling out, then vanishing without collecting his final paycheck. Diane paused mid-sentence, like she wanted to say more, but instead moved on to which cleaner worked best on marble. I didn't push. My shift was 8 p.m. to midnight, Monday through Friday, after the church closed at 7, following evening mass. I'd have the place to myself, which suited me fine. The quiet was peaceful, a stark contrast to my noisy apartment. I'd bring my laptop, take breaks, to chip away at history papers, the creaks and groans of the old building, fading into the background. It felt safe, sacred, even until the mud started appearing. Late September. About a month into the job, I noticed small clumps of dirt scattered across the sanctuary floor, like someone had tracked it in on their shoes. At first, I thought it was from the morning mass crowd, but the mud was always in the same place, starting from the side hallway, by the crypt door, trailing into the main sanctuary, and ending at the middle left section of pew's 8th row back. Pew 8L. I'd sweep it up, mop the stone tiles until they gleamed, but the next morning it'd be back fresh damp, as if I'd never touched the floor. The tracks were odd, too. Too long, too narrow, with a dragging quality, like whoever left them was limping, favoring one leg. I asked Diane about it one morning, when she came in to set up for daily mass. Her face tightened. Not quite worry, but something heavier. "I've seen it too," she admitted. "Always from that hallway, always to 8L. I clean it before anyone else gets here. Make sure that crypt door's locked, Jamie. Really locked. Test the handle. After that, I paid closer attention. The mud showed up twice a week. No pattern I could pin down. It wasn't tied to weather. We'd had a dry spell for weeks, no rain to track in. I tried matching the prints to shoes, but they didn't fit any pattern I knew. They felt wrong, like they weren't made by anything that walked right. One night in October, I decided to check the crypt door mid-shift around 10 p.m. instead of waiting until I locked up. The basement was colder than the sanctuary, the air thick with the smell of rust and damp stone. The crypt door was solid, the handle ice cold under my palm. I tugged, locked tight. I went back upstairs, vacuuming the carpet runner in the aisle. But when I passed pew 8L, I froze. The seat was smeared with mud, still glistening, as if someone had just sat there. On the back of the pew in front, there was a handprint. Fingers too long, palm too narrow, pressed into the wood like a brand. My heart thudded loud enough to drown out the hum of the vacuum. I checked the crypt door again, still locked. But now there were mud tracks leading from 8L back to the hallway, like something had come, sat, and returned the way it came. I didn't sleep that night, my mind spinning with questions I didn't want answers to. The next day, I mentioned it to Father Brennan, trying to sound casual, like maybe it was a prank. He went quiet, his fingers drumming on his desk. "Did you see anyone?" he asked. I shook my head. He nodded, slow, and changed the subject. That's when I started digging. Diane had given me a key to the archive room weeks ago, so I could vacuum in there. It was a maze of boxes, ledgers, and yellowed papers going back to the church's founding. During my breaks, I pored over burial records, looking for something. I found it in a ledger from 1958, a series of entries about a man named Lawrence Vogel. Homeless, he'd been sleeping in the church during the winter, doing odd jobs for Father O'Brien, the priest at the time. The entries stopped abruptly. The next mention was his burial in the crypt, February 1959. No cause of death, but a note in different handwriting scrawled in the margin, found in pew 8L each morning. Would not leave. Growing thin. Pew 8L. The words sank into me like a stone. I started watching that spot, setting up my laptop, where I could see it while I worked. Days passed. Nothing. Then, On a Thursday night in early November, it happened. I was dusting the altar, the church dim, lit only by the faint glow of emergency lights. A movement caught my eye, a shadow shifting against the darker shadows. It rose from behind pew 8L, like it had been lying on the floor, and sat perfectly still, facing the altar, as if waiting for Mass to begin. Tall, thin, its outline wrong, too angular, too stretched. I stood frozen, dust rag clutched in my hand, my breath shallow. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just sat a void in the shape of a man. Then it turned its head, slow, deliberate, its face catching the faint light. Its eyes were wrong, reflecting light that wasn't there like a cat's, but set in a face that wasn't quite human. The shape was off the jaw, too sharp, the cheeks hollowed beyond hunger. My stomach twisted a primal urge, screaming at me to run. I backed away, step by step, until my back hit the sacristy door. The figure stood, not stood unfolded, its joints bending at angles that made my skin crawl. It stepped into the aisle, bare feet, leaving muddy prints on the stone, each step deliberate, heavy. It spoke, or tried to. Not words, but a wet, gurgling sound, like drowning, like a throat that had forgotten how to form syllables. Mass. Last. Or maybe it was just noise, the sound of something that shouldn't be. I ran. Left my supplies, my laptop, my keys, sprinted to my car, and drove home. My hands shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel. I called Father Brennan, told him I was sick, couldn't come in. His voice was calm, too calm, like he'd been expecting this. "Take care, Jamie," he said, and hung up. But rent was due, and I was broke. When he called the next morning, asking if I could come in to grab my things and finish the week, I said yes. I had no choice. I went back that night, right after the church closed. Diane was there, which surprised me. She worked mornings. My laptop and keys were in the office, cleaned and neatly arranged. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the night before hanging between us. "Figured it out, didn't you?" she asked. I told her about the ledger, about Lawrence Vogel. She nodded, her eyes distant. "There's more to it," she said. Lawrence had been dying when Father O'Brien took him in tuberculosis, probably, though they never confirmed it. He'd spent his last weeks in pew 8L, too weak to move, praying, until he didn't wake up. They found him one morning, dead for days, but he kept coming back. Every night, same pew. They tried blessings, exorcisms, even moved his body to the cemetery. Nothing worked. He always returned, so we learned to live with him. Diane said, her voice steady but tired. The crypt door wasn't locked to keep him in. It was to slow him down, give people time to leave if they needed to. Clean the mud before parishioners asked questions. Lock up by 9:30 before he usually appeared. Check the crypt door, but don't linger. If you see him, don't run it. Startles him, makes him move wrongly, leaves too much mud, sometimes broken pews. Back away slowly, let him have his pew. He'd go back to the crypt by 2 a.m., sometimes 3. I could switch to afternoons 4 to 8, but the pay was less. They needed someone at night because of Lawrence. Hazard pay, she called it, though they'd never admit it. I stayed. I needed the money. For a year and a half, I worked those nights locking up early, checking the crypt door, my heart pounding every time I passed 8L. I saw Lawrence a dozen times, always in that pew, his eyes glinting in the dark. Once near Christmas, he nodded, like we were regulars sharing a silent understanding. The worst nights were when he didn't show. I'd wonder where he was, what was keeping him. Those nights, I'd prop a chair against the sacristy door and stay there until my shift ended, listening for the drag of his steps. Diane retired while I was there. Marcella took the morning shift. I trained her like Diane trained me, where the supplies were, how the boiler worked, what to do about the mud. She took it better than I had said her grandmother saw things like this in the old country. Just part of life, she said. My last week, I left a note in Pew 8L. Thank you for letting me work here, Jamie. Felt foolish the moment I did it, but the next night, it was gone. Muddy fingerprints smudged on the wood where it had been. Maybe he took it. Maybe it was coincidence. Father Brennan retired after I graduated. Father Wen runs St. Agatha's, now a practical man, who reinforced the crypt door with steel and installed new lighting. Garrett still attends Mass there. He says they hired a daytime cleaning crew, but last month they put out a call for a night security guard, someone to check doors, make sure everything's locked. The cleaning crew keeps finding mud in the mornings. No one knows why. I thought about calling Father Wen, warning him, but what would I say? That he needs someone who knows the real job, who understands when to clean and when to leave things alone. Someone who can share a space with whatever Lawrence Vogel has become. He'll figure it out. They always do. And somewhere in town, there's a broke college kid who'll take the job thinking it's just mopping floors. They'll learn. Every night, I still check my locks twice, and I never sit too long in one place, not when I'm alone. And the air was wrong before I even touched the door, heavy with a stench that clawed its way into my lungs like something had crawled into the walls of cabin 6 and died there, waiting for me to find it. I'd been a counselor at this summer camp for 2 years, long enough to know the rhythm of the place, the way the pines whispered at dusk, the way the lake's chill clung to your skin. But that spring, when George, our grizzled boss, asked for volunteers to clean the camp before the season started, I didn't expect to walk into a nightmare. My name's Bush Dog, a nickname I picked up from my first summer here. And this is the story of how Cabin 6 changed me. The camp sat in the middle of nowhere, a cluster of cabins and dirt trails swallowed by towering pines. The lake at the edge of the property still had patches of ice glinting like broken glass under the weak April sun. Cell service died the moment you crossed the property line, leaving you with nothing but the forest's silence. George, who'd run the place for 17 years, handed out assignments that first morning. 5 of us showed up. Me, Aaron, another counselor with a sharp wit, 2 maintenance guys who smelled like motor oil, and George himself, his coffee mug, as permanent as his scowl. 2 cabins each, he said, his voice rough as gravel. Clean 'em, check for damage report, anything major. I drew cabins 5 and 6, tucked deeper into the woods than the rest their porches, half hidden by overgrown ferns. I didn't mind. I liked the quiet, the way the forest seemed to hold its breath when you were alone. Cabin 5 was a breeze. Dust coated the bunk's spider webs, draped the corners, and a window latch hung loose. But nothing a broom and some elbow grease couldn't fix. I swept the floor, patched the latch as best I could, and jotted it down for George to double-check. The air in there was musty but familiar, the kind of smell you'd expect from a place locked up all winter. I finished in an hour and headed to Cabin 6, expecting more of the same. But the moment I stepped onto its porch, the world went still. No birds sang. No wind stirred the pines. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating, like the forest was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I stood there, my hand hovering over the doorknob, my pulse ticking in my ears. The wood under my boots felt soft, bloated, as if it had soaked up something it shouldn't have. I told myself it was just nerves, that I was overthinking it. I'd cleaned dozens of cabins before. This was no different. But when I unlocked the door and pushed it open, the air hit me like a fist. A sour, earthy stench flooded my nose, thick and wet, like mold and rotting wood, laced with something sharper. Sulfur, maybe, or the faint tang of decay. My eyes watered, and I gagged, covering my mouth with my sleeve. This wasn't the usual mustiness of an old cabin. This was something alive, something wrong. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance. The bunks were neatly stacked in the corner, their metal frames dulled by time. Cubbies lined the walls, still closed, and a few faded drawings from last summer's campers hung crookedly on the bulletin board. Stick figures and lopsided suns, innocent in a way that felt out of place. But the smell clung to everything, sinking into my clothes, my hair, my skin. I crossed to the back window, desperate for fresh air, and cracked it open. The forest outside was a wall of black, the pines so dense they swallowed the daylight. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to shake the unease, when something shifted in the reflection. A flicker of movement in the trees, too tall to be an animal, too deliberate to be the wind. I spun around my heart, slamming against my ribs, but the room was empty. Just me and that god-awful smell. I forced myself to focus, to do the job I was here for. I swept the floor, checked the cubbies, and inspected the bunks. That's when I saw it. On the far right bunk, the bottom mattress was stained. Not with blood or dirt, but with a dark, oily smear that ran down the side, pooling on the floorboards below. The wood beneath was swollen, soft to the touch, and gave off the same vile stench that filled the room. I knelt my glove, brushing the surface, and the board yielded slightly, like it was still damp. My stomach twisted as I imagined what could have caused it, something seeping up from below something that didn't belong. I checked the ceiling for leaks, but it was clean. No cracks, no water stains. I even crawled under the cabin, which sat a foot off the ground, hoping to find a dead animal or a broken pipe. Nothing. Just a few crumpled candy wrappers and the faint, lingering scent of decay. I finished the sweep, left the windows open to air out the stench, and snapped a photo of the stained bunk to show my friends later. By the time I got back to the main lodge, the sun was dipping low, painting the lake in shades of bruise purple. George and one of the maintenance guys were at the dining table swapping stories over coffee. George was in the middle of a tale about a raccoon that died in a cereal box when I mentioned Cabin 6. "Back right bunk," I said, showing him the photo. "Smells like something's rotting in there." I checked everywhere, but I couldn't find the source. George's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to his mug. He took a long sip before answering. "Used to be a mouse nest under that floor. Chewed through everything. We sealed it up years ago, but moisture gets in sometimes. Don't worry about it." His voice was flat, not the reassuring grumble I was used to. It was like he was reading a script, like he wanted me to drop it. I nodded, but his words didn't sit right. They felt like a door slammed shut, a warning not to push further. That night, I couldn't sleep. The smell from Cabin 6 had followed me, clinging to my jacket, my hair, even my thoughts. I showered twice, scrubbing until my skin was raw, but it was still there, a ghost in my senses. Lying in my bunk, I kept picturing that stained mattress, the way the wood had felt under my fingers, soft, yielding, alive. What was under that floor? What was George not telling me? The questions looped in my mind, tightening like a noose, until I knew I had to go back. Not tomorrow, not in daylight, but tonight. I had to see Cabin 6 again, to prove to myself it was just a leaky pipe or a dead animal. Anything but what my gut was screaming. The path to Cabin 6 was darker than I remembered the pines, looming like silent judges as I picked my way through the underbrush. My flashlight cut a thin beam through the night, catching on roots and rocks, but it did little to ease the weight of the forest's silence. The air was cold, heavy, with the promise of rain, and every step felt like a trespass. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just tired. But the memory of that stain, that smell, pulsed in my mind like a warning. I gripped the flashlight tighter, its metal warm against my palm, and kept moving. Aaron's words from earlier that day echoed in my head. We'd been hauling gear from storage to the lodge, our arms full of dusty ropes and life vests, when I'd mentioned Cabin 6. She'd stopped, her eyes narrowing. Cabin 6, she'd said, her voice low. Did George tell you about the girl? When I shook my head, she sighed like she was weighing whether to let me in on a secret. A few summers back, before you started, there was this kid, 10 years old, maybe, kept saying she saw someone in the woods outside Cabin 6. A woman, she said, standing between the trees, watching her all night. I'd pressed her for details, my curiosity outweighing the unease creeping up my spine. Someone from Camp A hiker. Erin shook her head. No clue. The kid was terrified, said the woman. Never moved, just stared. Then one morning, she was gone, vanished from her bunk. The whole camp searched for hours until they found her curled up on that same bunk, soaked to the bone. Smelled like lake water, like she'd been dragged through it. She wouldn't talk, just kept whispering about the woman in the trees. Her parents yanked her out of camp after that. George swore he fixed the cabin, but she trailed off, her eyes distant. Some things don't get fixed. Now standing on the porch of Cabin 6, those words felt like a prophecy. The door was ajar, which stopped me cold. I'd locked it that morning. I knew I had. The memory of the latch snapping into place was clear as day, but here it was open just enough to let the stench spill out. That same sour, earthy smell, but sharper, now laced with something sweet, like overripe fruit, left to rot. I covered my nose with my sleeve and pushed the door open, my flashlight sweeping the room. The bunks, the cubbies, the drawings, they were all there, unchanged. But the air felt heavier, like it was pressing against my skin, urging me to leave. I stepped inside my boots, scuffing the floorboards, and aimed the light at the far right bunk. The mattress was flipped, not torn or tossed, but neatly turned over the stained side, hidden as if someone had wanted to erase it. My breath caught my mind scrambling for an explanation. George. One of the maintenance guys. But why at night? And why so carefully? I knelt beside the bunk, my heart pounding, and ran the flashlight along the floor. The wood was still damp, the grain darkened by whatever had soaked into it. And then I heard it, a slow, deliberate scrape, like a fingernail dragging across wood, coming from beneath the bunk. I froze, my breath shallow. Every nerve screaming at me to run. The sound came again, softer this time, but closer, as if whatever was down there knew I was listening. Feel the chill crawling up your spine, the way your body begs you to move, but you can't. Against every instinct, I lowered the flashlight, angling it under the bunk. The beam caught on a small wooden panel, half the size of a floor tile, its edges cracked and swollen. Something was wedged in the seam, a long, dark shape, curved like a claw. A fingernail, impossibly long, black as oil, glinting in the light. My blood turned to ice. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair, and the scraping stopped, replaced by a silence so deep it felt like the world had died. I ran. Not a choice. Just instinct, my legs carrying me out the door and into the night. The forest blurred around me, branches snagging at my clothes, but I didn't stop until I reached the lodge. I slammed the door shut and sank to the floor, my chest heaving. The image of that fingernail burned into my mind. What was it? What lived under that floor? I didn't sleep that night, didn't even try. The smell was back, clinging to me like a second skin, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw that claw, heard that scrape. The next morning, I told George the cabin smelled worse, that the bunk was still leaking. I didn't mention the fingernail or the flipped mattress. I couldn't find the words. He nodded, his face unreadable, and said, "That place always gets the worst of it in spring." His words were a wall, a refusal to acknowledge what we both knew. The rest of the week passed in a blur. I avoided Cabin 6 sticking to the main lodge, but the memory of that night followed me a shadow I couldn't shake. Before I left, I went back one last time in daylight, needing to see it for myself. The panel under the bunk was gone, nailed shut, with fresh boards, the hammer marks still bright. The mattress had been replaced, the new one, clean and untouched. George never said a word, but I knew he'd been there. He knew what lived in cabin 6, and he'd chosen to bury it. I left the camp that day, but the smell, the scrape, the image of that fingernail, they came with me. Some nights, I still wake up, certain I hear it again, scratching beneath my bed, waiting for me to look. Every time you log into your world, someone is watching, not just your words, but the way you move the life you don't show. They're out there, piecing you together, and you'll never know how close they are until it's too late. My name is Twitchy Dude, and this is how a single username unraveled my life. The glow of my monitor bathed my cramped apartment in a soft blue haze, the only light in a world that felt alive only when I hit go live. I'd been streaming for 3 years, clawing my way to a modest 150 viewers on a good night. Indie horror games were my thing. Amnesia, Outlast, anything that made my heart race and my chat explode with laughter. The money wasn't great, just enough to split rent with Jess in our little Portland suburb hideaway. But the community, that was gold. Every ping of a donation, every inside joke typed in all caps. It was my oxygen. One night, during a shaky Silent Hill 2 run, a new name popped into chat Polar Night for 2. His first message was a jab at James Sunderland's voice, acting sharp and clever, and the chat ate it up. This guy gets it, I thought. He dropped a $5 donation with a note. Keep running from those nurses, dude. You're killing it. I laughed, thanked him on stream, and felt that warm buzz of connection. He was there the next night, and the next always with a quick wit and a small donation. $5 to $10. Once 20, with a meme reference that had my regulars howling. He remembered their usernames, too, tossing out, Yo Pixel Panda, how's your cat doing? Or Skull Crusher 99, you still working that night shift? It was like he'd been there forever. Within a month, Polar Night 42 was my top supporter. Not whale-level money, but steady, like clockwork. Every stream, he'd drop $20, with a message tied to some running gag in the community, a line from a bad jump scare, or a nod to my infamous controller throwing meltdown. Jess sprawled on the couch behind me, would roll her eyes when I read his donations out loud. Your internet boyfriend's back. She'd tease her voice, light but distant. She worked downtown at a marketing firm, didn't get the gaming thing, but she'd always been my anchor. 4 years together. two living in this shoebox apartment. She was my constant. But something about Polar Night started to itch at me. He'd ask about my schedule, not casually, but with a strange insistence. "What time you streaming tomorrow? I need to plan my breaks." If I was late or canceled a stream, maybe because Jess wanted a date night, or I was just burned out, he'd ping me on Discord. "Dude, you said 8 p.m. I waited. I'd laugh it off, type back, "Sorry, man." Life happens, but the messages piled up. He'd say he rearranged his work schedule for me, that I was letting the community down. His tone wasn't angry, not yet, but it was heavy, like I owed him something. I didn't tell Jess at first. She'd just say I was overthinking it, that fans get clingy. But one night, as I shut down my PC, I caught a message he'd sent, right as I ended the stream. "You looked tired tonight. You okay?" My webcam had been on, sure, but the way he said it felt too close, like he'd been studying my face through the screen. I stared at the words, my reflection dim in the black monitor, and felt a chill I couldn't shake. He's just a fan, I told myself. Don't make it weird. But what if he's more than that? What if he's already closer than you think? The weeks blurred each stream, a cycle of adrenaline and exhaustion. Polar Night, Dritu, was always there, his username a constant in the chat's scrolling chaos. His donations grew bolder, $50 one night, with a message, "For the coffee you're always drinking." What's the brand? I laughed, said something vague about Folgers, but the question lingered. He'd started slipping personal probes into his messages, always wrapped in a donation, so I couldn't ignore them. "You mentioned a gym last week. Which one? I'm looking for a spot." Or saw you driving a blue sedan in that Instagram story. What model? My stomach twisted each time, but I deflected, changed the subject, cracked a joke. The chat didn't notice, but I did. Other regulars started to call him out. Pixel Panda typed "Yo Polar Chill" with the detective vibes. Skullcrusher 99 was blunter. "Dude, you're creeping." Polar Night 42 would fire back defensive, but slick. Just supporting my favorite streamer. Guess you guys don't get loyalty. The chat would move on, but his messages to me didn't. He'd DM me after streams, passive-aggressive jabs about how he deserved to know more since he'd donated so much. "I'm your biggest fan," he'd write. Don't I get a little trust? Jess saw the strain. One night, as I paced the apartment, rereading his latest DM, "You're in Portland, right?" What part? She put down her phone and frowned. "What's with you?" "You're wired." I spilled it all, the questions, the insistence, the way his messages felt like fingers reaching through the screen. She leaned back, her brown eyes steady. Ban him. He's a creep. The money's not worth it. I nodded, but hesitated. His donations were half my rent some months. And what if banning him made it worse? What if he was just intense? The breaking point came during a charity stream for Extra Life, a 12-hour marathon that had me running on Red Bull and willpower. The chat was electric donations pouring in, and we were close to 2,000 for the kids' hospital. Polar Night had been there all day, but his messages were sharper, meaner. He called other viewers, fake fans, said they didn't care about me like he did. Then, 8 hours in, he dropped a $100 donation. The message popped up on my overlay, and my blood froze. Twitchy. Dude, aka my real last name, saw you at the Burnside coffee shop editing vids. Keep it up. I'd never shared my last name. Not once. The coffee shop was my quiet spot, a place I went to edit when the apartment felt too small. The chat went dead silent, a rare void in the usual flood of emotes. My face burned. My voice caught, but I forced a smile. Thanks for the dono, man. I said my words, hollow. I transitioned to a break screen, my hands shaking as I opened the mod panel and banned Polar Night 2. The button confirmed his removal, and I felt a fleeting relief, like locking a door. But some doors don't stay locked. Some shadows slip through the cracks. The retaliation was instant. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with notifications. Instagram, Twitter, even LinkedIn, a platform I barely used. Burner accounts with random strings of numbers flooded my DMs. Ungrateful. You owe me. You'll regret this. He posted screenshots of every donation he'd ever made, hundreds of dollars over months, with captions demanding I unban him or refund him. I blocked each account, reported them, but new ones sprouted like roaches. My inbox became a war zone, each message a jab at my sanity. The messages grew darker. One account sent a single line. I know where you live. No address, but he described my building, the red brick, the cracked steps, the flickering street light out front. Another message. Saw Jess leave for work today. Blue coat. Right. My heart stopped. Jess had worn her blue coat that morning, her hair tied back as she rushed out. I called the cops, my voice trembling as I explained. The officer was polite but useless. No direct threat, no crime. Keep a record. A record. Like that would stop him. Jess started to pull away. She'd come home late, her phone glued to her hand. Her answers clipped. When I tried to talk about Polar Night 42, she'd sigh, her eyes drifting. "You're obsessed with this guy. It's just an internet troll. It's part of the job." Her words stung a betrayal from the woman who'd told me to ban him. I felt alone, trapped in a digital cage with an enemy I couldn't see. Then I found it. Jess left her laptop open on the couch, a Facebook notification glowing. "Miss you too. Can't wait to see you." The sender was a guy named Mike, a gym trainer with a chiseled jaw and a profile picture that screamed stock photo. I shouldn't have looked, but I scrolled. Weeks of messages, starting with compliments on her Instagram, escalating to daily texts, plans to meet while I was streaming. My world tilted. I confronted her, my voice raw. She deflected, accused me of snooping, said I'd been distant obsessed with my stupid streaming drama. When I pointed out the timing, Mike's account appeared right after I banned Polar Night 42. She snapped. "Not everything's about you. We broke up that night." 4 years gone in a shouting match that left me hollow. I crashed on my buddy AJ's couch, my life packed into a duffel bag. But Polar Nights wasn't done. He knew about the breakup, somehow within hours. His messages turned gleeful. "She left you. You deserve it?" This is just the start. He included details, private arguments, insecurities I'd only shared with Jess. My skin crawled. How did he know? Because he was always watching. Always closer than you thought. I couldn't sleep on AJ's couch, my phone buzzing with new burner accounts. I started digging. I reverse searched Mike's profile picture. The image was stolen, a mashup of fitness influencer posts from 3 different accounts. His Facebook was 3 weeks old, created the day after I banned Polar Night 42. My stomach churned. I called Jess, begging her to listen. She hung up twice, but I got through. "Check the photos," I said. "Search the gym." An hour later, she called back, her voice small. The gym had no trainer named Mike. The phone number was a burner app. It was all fake. She wanted to fix things, but I couldn't. She'd shared intimate details with a stranger, our fights, my fears, photos she'd sent him. Whether she meant to or not, she'd fed my stalker ammunition. He'd used it to taunt me, anonymous accounts, quoting things I'd said in private, twisting my life into a weapon. I moved back to my parents' house in Eugene, a defeated retreat. I told them I needed a break from streaming from Portland, from everything. They didn't ask too many questions, just gave me my old bedroom and a quiet kind of love. The harassment slowed, but didn't stop. An email here, a DM there. A package arrived at my parents' house, an empty box with a note. Remember when you had a career? My dad wanted to call the cops again, but I was too tired. I just wanted it to end. Then came the morning that broke me. I woke to my mom's scream, raw and jagged from the backyard. Mocha, our orange tabby, the cat who'd slept on my bed for 15 years, was lying by the fence. Her fur was matted, her body still warm, a knife wound in her side. My mom collapsed, sobbing. My dad's face was a mask of rage. I felt nothing, just a cold certainty. This was him. Polar night had crossed from digital to real, leaving blood on our grass, and he was still out there, watching, waiting for the next move. I killed Twitchy, dude, that day. I deleted everything. Twitch, YouTube, Discord, years of content, a community I'd poured my soul into. I changed my handles, locked every account, vanished as completely as I could. I got a job at a hardware store, a gray, anonymous place where no one asked my last name. My parents pushed me to see a therapist, someone who dealt with digital trauma. She helped me rebuild, piece by piece, a life without screens. The stalking stopped after Mocha. Maybe Polar Night 2 got bored. Maybe he found a new target. Maybe he just wanted to win, and her death was his trophy. I'll never know. And that uncertainty is a weight I carry. Jess texts sometimes, apologizing, saying she's in therapy, grappling with how she fell for his lies. I don't reply. That door is locked. I still feel him sometimes. When a new game drops, I imagine streaming it, the chat alive, with old friends. But then I see Mocha's body, my mom's face, and I shut it down. I play offline now, alone, invisible. It's safer. The internet doesn't forget, and some shadows never leave. Once I Googled my old username, a moment of weakness. A Reddit thread asked what happened to me. Most said I burned out like so many streamers. But one comment from a brand new account stopped me cold. He learned his lesson. He's still out there, and he knows where I am. Some memories are like scars. You don't notice them until something tears them open. My father carried one such scar, buried deep, locked away for decades, until a summer barbecue in my teenage years cracked it wide. I was 16, whining about my part-time job, slinging sandwiches at Subway, complaining about the grease and the customers who yelled over wrong orders. Dad, usually a man of few words, had a couple of beers that night, an unusual sight. The fire pit crackled casting shadows across our backyard, and his eyes, glinting in the orange glow, seemed to drift somewhere far away. "You think your job's tough?" he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Let me tell you about the morning I ran for my life." It was 1973, and my father was 12. A scrawny kid with a paper route in our small hometown. Every morning, before the sun even thought about rising, he'd drag himself out of bed at 5:00 a.m., hop on his rusted Schwinn bike, and pedal through the frost-bitten streets to deliver the morning edition to 43 houses. He could finish in under an hour if he pushed hard, leaving just enough time to scarf down breakfast before the school bus rumbled by at 6:30. He earned $2.70, a week pennies by today's standards, but to a kid back then, it was enough to buy comic books and candy bars, maybe save a little for a new baseball glove. He told me about the route with a strange pride, like it was a badge of honor. But when he got to house number 37, his voice changed. The Brinneman house. Even saying the name seemed to tighten his throat. The Brinneman place was a decaying Victorian relic set back from the street, like it was trying to hide. Its paint peeled in long, curling strips, and the lawn was a jungle of knee-high weeds that never seemed to be cut. Mrs. Breineman lived there alone, a widow, since her husband died in the Korean War. No kids, no family, no visitors. Nobody ever saw her. My father had been delivering papers there for 6 months and never once laid eyes on her. Every Friday, he'd find an envelope in the mailbox with exact change for the subscription, the bills old and crinkled, smelling faintly of mothballs and dust. The other paper boys had stories. Of course, kids always do. Jimmy, a wiry kid with a big mouth, swore he'd seen her peering from an upstairs window, a pale smudge behind yellowed curtains. Mike, another boy, said she was scarred from a fire, her face so ruined she couldn't bear to be seen. Just kid stuff. My father thought the kind of tales you spin to make a boring job feel like an adventure. But he'd never laughed at those stories. Not really. That November morning was different. A hard freeze had swept through the night, before the kind that turned the air sharp and left a crust of ice on everything. My father remembered scraping frost off his bike seat with numb fingers, his breath clouding in the pre-dawn dark. The papers were heavier that day, stuffed with Thanksgiving sale inserts, and by the time he reached the Brinneman house, his hands were stiff, his knuckles red from the cold. He pedaled up the cracked driveway, ready to toss the paper onto the porch, as always, when something made him stop. A shape behind the glass storm door. His heart stuttered. For the first time In 6 months, Mrs. Breineman was there standing just inside her silhouette, faintly lit by a dim lamp somewhere deeper in the house. She wore a pale blue gown, thin and loose, like something you'd see in a hospital ward. Her white hair hung in tangled strands past her shoulders, catching the faint light like spider webs. She raised an hand, slow and deliberate, motioning for him to come closer. "Come here, kid. She needs you." My father hesitated, his bike wobbling beneath him. He thought maybe she was hurt. Maybe she'd fallen and couldn't get up. That's what good kids did, right? Help people in trouble. So he propped his bike against a tree, his sneakers crunching on the frozen grass as he walked up the path. The porch light was off. The house swallowed in shadow. But as he reached the bottom of the porch steps, he could see her more clearly. And that's when he understood why she never left that house. Her face was falling apart, not scarred, not burned, but collapsing like wet clay sliding off a sculpture. The skin on the left side of her face hung loose, drooping in folds that swayed with every slight movement. Beneath it, something glistened, raw wrong, a color that didn't belong on a human body, like the inside of a spoiled fruit. Her eye on that side had slipped, dangling near her cheekbone, still tethered by thin strands of tissue rolling in its socket as she tilted her head. When she tried to smile, the motion pulled more skin downward, bunching at her jaw like melted wax dripping onto a candle. My father's stomach churned, his breath catching in his throat. He wanted to scream, but his voice was gone, stolen by the sight of her. She opened the storm door, the hinges groaning, and stepped onto the porch. A wave of stench hit him, thick, rancid, like meat left to rot in a summer ditch. It wasn't just decay. It was something deeper, something alive and wrong, as if her body was rotting from the inside out while she still moved. She tried to speak, her mouth twitching, but no words came, just wet, gurgling sounds like water trapped in a clogged drain. Her lips parted, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp, stained yellow and black. She reached for him with both hands, and he saw her fingers, impossibly long, thin as twigs, bending at angles that made his skin crawl. They weren't just deformed. They looked like they'd been broken and reset over and over, healed into something no longer human. Run. Now. His body obeyed before his mind caught up. He dropped his bike, the papers spilling across the driveway, and sprinted down the street, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. Behind him, he heard her not running, not chasing, but coming. Her footsteps were uneven, a dragging, lurching rhythm, like a puppet with half its strings cut. That wet, wordless sound followed fainter, but relentless, a call that burrowed into his skull. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The cold air burned his lungs, his legs pumping faster than they ever had, carrying him through the last 6 houses on his route. He threw the remaining papers from the middle of the street, not caring where they landed, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the handlebars. When he finally retrieved his bike, when he stumbled through the front door of our house, his mother was at the stove, flipping pancakes. She took one look at his pale face, his wide eyes, and set the spatula down. "What happened?" she asked, her voice sharp with worry. He told her everything. The shape behind the door, the face that wasn't a face, the hands that reached for him, the smell that clung to his clothes like a curse. She listened, her lips pressed tight, and when he finished, she didn't scold him or call him a liar. She just hugged him, told him to stay home from school that day, and made him a cup of hot cocoa. But he saw the way her hands trembled when she poured the milk, the way her eyes flicked toward the window, as if expecting something to be standing there. Years later, my father learned what became of the Brenneman house. In 1981, a lightning strike set it ablaze, reducing it to ash before the fire trucks could arrive. They found her body in the basement, surrounded by medical equipment, syringes, bandages, and boxes of skin grafts, the kind used in experimental treatments for burn victims. The VA hospital had tried to rebuild her after the war took her husband, and grief took her sanity. But the grafts hadn't taken. They'd failed in ways the doctors couldn't explain, ways they didn't dare write down. Her body had rejected the new skin, twisting it, stretching it, until it became something else entirely. The fire had spared the truth, but not the land. My father drove by that lot in the early 2000s, long after the rubble was cleared. Nothing grew there, just a square of dead gray grass, like the earth itself had been poisoned by what happened inside those walls. You can't outrun some things. My father's voice broke as he finished the story, his eyes fixed on the fire pit, the flames reflecting in his pupils like a warning. He didn't tell me to toughen up or stop complaining about my job. He just stood, clapped a hand on my shoulder, and went inside. That night, I lay awake, imagining a 12-year-old boy pedaling through the dark, chased by a figure that wasn't human anymore. I thought about the Brenneman house, about the envelope of mothball-scented bills, about the kids who whispered stories they didn't fully understand. And I wondered what else was out there, waiting behind closed doors, watching from the shadows of ordinary places. Sometimes, when I drive through town, I take the long way to avoid that empty lot. I tell myself it's just a shortcut, but deep down, I know better. Some scars don't belong to you, but they mark you anyway.